Hello. Welcome once more to Denton's Tales, where I give you the facts and not the fictions, tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and hopefully give you a smile or two, yes, maybe even a laugh. A bit of humour makes the medicine go down better, I always think. I don't really care for the dry, professorial, if that is actually a word, approach. The sort of yes, class, have your notebooks ready, questions will be asked at the end. That usually puts me completely to sleep. I just hope you'll all still be awake at the end of this one. Previously, I've talked about the non-Viking non-compass, the Ægishjalmr, the so-called Viking compass, which has about as much to do with Vikings or pointing the way anywhere as does a hamburger with extra cheese. You could bring a real Viking back in a time machine and show him the Ægishjalmr, and he'd say, "Oh, what's that thing?" This time, I want to discuss something with at least a genuine Norse connection. Oh yes, actually genuine. Insofar as it is actually mentioned in documentation that goes as far back as any written records do, close to what is called the Viking Age. Now, the Old Norse did not write books. They could have, using the runic alphabets they had, but they didn't, for whatever reason best known to themselves. They used them for inscriptions on rune stones, like Olaf went off someplace and never come home because he died there, sort of thing. Or they were put on talismans or woven in fabric as decorations and so forth. But they didn't use them to write books as such. And it wasn't until the 13th century that the various sagas and poems were actually written down, things previously handed down by word of mouth by storytellers called skalds, for example. Now, the documentation I refer to is the Codex Regius, or the Royal Book. And that was a collection of various poetic works by unknown authors, penned, and that's a posh way to say they wrote it, in Iceland and Greenland around 1270 A.D. But there is a problem with that. There's always a but, isn't there? Old it may be, that's undeniable, it certainly is, but it isn't contemporary with the Viking Age. It is quoting earlier sources. Now, we know that from the language used. Oh, no, this is awfully clever. See, because the writers would generally replace Old Norse words with similar but later Icelandic ones, but every so often they didn't, and they left the original words, so we know they were copying older documents, which were themselves either copies of even older manuscripts or simply, verbal tales passed down by the skalds. So the actual age of the poems themselves is unknown, other than their being older than the Codex Regius. Kind of obvious, I suppose. But how old is that? Were they contemporary with the early Viking Age or themselves later ideas? Well, we don't know. We don't have the faintest idea. But we do know they are as close to those times as it's actually possible to get, so we just have to put up with that. The Ægishjalmr, usually referred to as the Helm of Awe, unlike the totally fake Ægishjalmr, does have this claim to authenticity. Yes, well, at least insofar as its name goes, if not the drawing of it, since it's mentioned in the Fafnir from the Poetic Edda, which tells of the dragon Fafnir, lurking in a cave, guarding his hoard of treasure. Yes. Keep away! Keep your hands off! It's mine! Yes, all mine, I tell you! And I'm a big horrible dragon, so you keep your orbs off me glittery stuff, or I'll right proper do you, I will! Or words to that effect. Well, I'm sure he probably would have phrased it a bit differently to that. And to make sure nobody gets their pilfering mitts on his lovely shiny thingies, he's wearing a magic helmet as he does so. Now, here is an extract from the Bellows translation of the tale, where Fafnir tells the great hero Sigurdur about the wonderful helm he's wearing to guard his treasure. Mind you, since Sigurdur has just shoved a sword through him and he's sort of, dying, while he's chatting away, I rather doubt the magical efficacy of the helmet. Anyway, this is what he says just before he pops off and goes belly up. Fafnir spake. Oh, I do like that word, spake. It has a ring to it, doesn't it? Anyway, he spake thus. The fear helm I wore to affright mankind, while guarding my gold I lay. Oh, mightier seemed I than any man, for a fiercer never I found. Well, at least, until Sigurd came along and skewed him. It is also mentioned in Ægishjalmr as something possessed by the dragon Fafnir before Sigurd went sullen off with it afterwards. Mind you, as I said, one does rather question the power of this mighty fear helm Fafnir wore, since Sigurd had shoved a sword through him and gone off with the gold as well as the helmet that was supposedly guarding the gold. Fafnir dead, the gold gone, the helmet gone. If he'd survived, I think he could have claimed a refund on the helmet. It doesn't seem to have been a whole lot of use, does it? So, the fear helm is mentioned in the Poetic Edda, thus possibly dating it to at least the end of the Viking Age. Of course, we can't prove that. And the Poetic Edda itself, as I said, is not contemporary with the Viking Age and paganism. It was written 170 years or so after the Christian conversion of Iceland, so it's really got nothing to do with paganism. But, you say, the symbol is mentioned in the oldest documentation we have, and thus it is linked to the Viking Age. Well, the symbol is mentioned, yes, but you see, that's the key word, mentioned, not illustrated, or even described in detail. I mean, they actually haven't got the faintest idea what the thing looked like. All we know about it is its name and that Fafnir wore it. It was a helmet, which is a very logical reason, of course, to call it a helm, and Sigurd scarpered off with it after he, did in Fafnir, and he took his hoard as well. Were it something like, a sigil or a magic stave written on cloth or wood, or a talisman of some kind, it would hardly qualify as a helm. That term being applicable only to something worn up on the head. So there seems nothing to suggest it was anything other than a helmet, or at least something, well, I suppose something attached to or on a helmet of some kind, but a helmet nonetheless. Now, later references to it, however, dating from hundreds of years later, give a completely different interpretation, without the slightest evidence from any contemporary source, and the same may be said of the appearance of the famous symbol we see used so frequently. There is no contemporary drawing of it. No, we have no idea what the thing looked like. That came centuries later, and it was based on absolutely nothing from the Viking Age. They just made it up as they went along, using their own imagination. The symbol of the Helm of Awe appears nowhere in ancient times. It is never found on rune stones, woven fabric, or talismans, well, just as there's no contemporary description of it or how to use it, other than the fact that Fafnir wore it. That's not a great deal of help, is it? Were it of any great significance for people to use, rather than Fafnir's use of it, we would expect to find it mentioned or illustrated somewhere, but we don't. No, there isn't a sign of it. The Helm of Awe, that seems to have possessed, very little actual awe as far as the general population was concerned, and it certainly didn't do much for Fafnir himself. And the often quite detailed descriptions of how to use it only appeared more centuries afterwards, and changing it from an actual helmet to a symbol whose power could be unleashed simply by drawing it on something, drawing it on one's forehead, or carrying it in your hand, for example. And various illustrations of it are shown that all vary very, very considerably. There is no common image, as there is with, say, the Valknut or Thor's hammer. Now, all of which does call its genuineness rather into question, I think. So the only possible link to the Viking Age is the name, the fact that it was a helmet, and Fafnir, a character from Norse mythology. Mythology, not history. That's a point to be made. Wore it. The popular illustration of it that everyone is familiar with is, of course, this. Yes. It is so frequently used as a tattoo or a talisman by those wanting to follow the Old Norse way. but it doesn't appear until the 17th century, nearly 600 years after the end of the Viking Age. It isn't Scandinavian, but Icelandic, and it isn't even pagan. You know, it's about as pagan as the Pope. Yes, several references to it clearly showing its Christian origin. So, you know, if one were trying to impress Odin or Freya by getting it as a tattoo or wearing it as a talisman, oh, look what I'm wearing. Yes, oh, I follow you. Yes, you know. Well, you know, if you're trying to impress them, I think really, Ducky, you should stick to the hammer of Thor, you know, Mjolnir or the Valknut, which are genuine pagan Viking Age symbols. I've seen people explain the magical energies of this symbol and how to use them, but the symbol can stop evil in its tracks. Oh yes, you show it to evil, and evil just runs away like a cowardly custard. Oh, gone like a shot. There is a warrior symbol. It will fight for you. Yes, show this symbol, and it will give your enemies a jolly good thrashing. What? Yes, I'm sure it will. But in truth, it possesses no more magical energy than does a traffic stop sign at an intersection. Now, I saw one video where it was explained that its magic properties, you know, can be unleashed with particular potency by a woman. Oh, yes, by a woman. So all your Polones out there can work wonders with a few mumbles and a wave of this mighty symbol. So they claim. The idea, you see, is that in Old Norse times, the shamans, the Volur, well, they were women, yes, and then women today can unleash its power because women all those centuries ago could use it. Yes. Well, of course, it's true enough that the Norse shamans were women, yes, but, you know, the NAF idea rather falls apart since the symbol didn't exist until 600 years after the Viking Age, so no Volva would ever have seen it, or the slightest idea what the thing was if they had. You know, it seems a tad unlikely. Another video explained how the Vikings believed the symbol gave them protection. Oh, yes. Their warriors went to battle, guarded by its mighty power. And which, of course, again, since no Viking ever saw the thing, the Vikings being nothing more than bones by the time the symbol appeared, you know, their belief in its magical protection is, well, seems rather questionable, to say the least, doesn't it? A very significant point is that, as I mentioned, no two illustrations of the symbol are alike. And, you know, they bear so little resemblance to each other that it's hard to view them as supposedly the same symbol. In contrast, genuine Old Norse symbols, Mjolnir or the Valknut again, for example, well, they're always obviously the same. There may be different designs or none at all on a Mjolnir, for example, but the hammer itself is always the same basic design. It looks like a hammer, you see. The Valknut is always the same triple symbol. Now, the earliest illustration of the Helm of Awe is from the late 1500s in the Icelandic Book of Doctors, which is a collection of herbal remedies, spells, and so forth. And this is it. There you are. That is the earliest example of the symbol. Now, let me see. Does it resemble that one? No, quite clearly it does not. And it says that one must wash one's hands 3 times and say the Our Father between each wash to wash off the hatred of an enemy, to end disputes and killing, and make others look upon one with happiness. Oh, that sounds nice, doesn't it? Yes, but clearly that is Christian, not pagan, given the recitation of the Our Father, and of course quite unconnected with the Viking Age. Another symbol is shown, and it bears absolutely no resemblance to the other one, and here it is. Yes, as you see, it's not really, well, it's absolutely nothing like it at all. And it says it, to make an enemy fear you, carry these staves in your left hand. Oh yes, again, getting away from any type of helmet and becoming something held in the hand. Remember, Fafnir wasn't holding the thing in his claws. No. There is yet another version, and that is this one. Oh my, I mean, that looks like the Helm of Awe on steroids, you know, with all these little twiddly fancy bits. And this one, This could be used to catch a thief, but one had to say, In nomine Domini, Amen, which means in the name of the Lord. Amen, which again isn't very Viking, is it? No, Vikings weren't really very good at church stuff. Well, apart from burning them, yeah, they were really quite good at that. In the 17th century, we get the classic version that has become the one used, as I said, for tattoos and talismans and all sorts of things, and of course that one, which is in the Galdach, the Book of Magic, dating from 1670 and found in the collection of Bishop Hannes Finneson circa 1865. Now we are told that it, and I quote, will be made from lead and printed on the forehead when one expects his enemy to find him so as to prevail. Oddly enough, the word used for printed is borrowed from post-Reformation period German for some reason or other, which is about as un-Viking as you're really likely to get. But around the same time, a book was printed by Nathan Lindquist in Sweden with a version of the symbol really couldn't be any more different if it absolutely tried to. And there you are. That is that one. I mean, you see its great resemblance to the others, don't you? Yes. I see. And the text describing it loosely translates, says, to still all anger, make this on your forehead with the first finger of your left hand, and say, the Ægishjalmr is carried between the eyes. May anger go, conflict stop. May all men be as happy with me as was Mary with her blessed Son on the Victory Rock. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Again, this is totally Christian and seems to indicate that the symbol, well, it could be verbal as well as printed. You know, maybe mentioning saying it. What was the Victory Rock, you ask, where apparently Mary and her son had a really boner time there? Man, the faintest idea, and nobody else seems to either. So we have seen numerous, completely different versions of the symbol, which in itself seems to cast some doubt on it being an actual thing, you know. And none of them even remotely Viking or pagan, strongly Christian, in fact. And despite numerous claims as to its magical abilities, it is clearly meaningless in magical power. It ranks along with the rabbit's foot and the four-leaf clover. After all, you know, even to begin with, when Fafnir had it, it wasn't exactly, well, fantabulos, was it? Since he ended up dead and everything, you know, that it was supposedly protecting was pinched. Yes, I think a burglar alarm, you know, a good burglar alarm would have been a lot better than the helmet. No, there's no magic in the Helm of Awe, duckies, I'm afraid. It won't make you Merlin or Gandalf, and given all the variations of it, one could say, will the real Ægishjalmr please stand up? As a final note to those who still insist that the Helm of Awe is a symbol of magic power, please think about the original one. You know, and I can't stress this enough. The helm that Fafnir himself had, which, being the genuine article and possessed by a magic dragon as well, would have to be the most powerful in terms of magic. Oh, yes, I mean, far outstripping anything thought up later. And ask yourself, what did it do for Fafnir? Yes, exactly. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I shall say goodbye for now. As they said in old Norse times, farewell.